All right, so since paint stripper, good paint stripper that actually works is hard to come by these days, and when you do find it, it's exorbitantly expensive. I'm going to use this cupped wire brush. It's not super firm. It's not as aggressive as some, and with the low RPMs on the drill press, I've been finding it works pretty well. Probably wouldn't do it on a brass fount, but this is steel, and I think that should also help deal with some of the rust before we throw this in citric acid. So here goes. So I think that gives you some idea of how this goes. It's slow going. I think it may actually be faster than dealing with paint stripper in the end, but it does gradually come off, and it does kind of deal with the rust, and we'll have to see what we need to do with this fount once we've got the rust off, if it needs some filler or what, but we'll get to that after stripping it and getting it into the citric acid bath. So I'll finish this up and I'll see you on the other side. Before we leave the kitchen, there's one last thing to do. I'm going to put the fount into the citric acid just to take care of any surface rust or anything like that that may be inside, because it is a steel fount. Looking down there with a flashlight, everything looks okay. I'm not getting a bunch of crud coming out when I shake it. This will also clean it. And I'll leave that in there for a good 30 minutes or so. The outside came out pretty well with the wire wheel. I've wet sanded a few small spots that were a little bit rough, but I think it's good to paint. It's time to paint. I've got the fount stripped. I used the wire brush. I sanded it with, I think it was 220 grit, and then wet sanded it with 600 grit. It's got a few tiny little pits in it, but I think it's going to come out pretty well. I'm going to be painting it with this Rust-Oleum 2X. It's Hunter Green Gloss. The Rust-Oleum Hunter Green is a little yellowish, and that seems to match the older Colemans quite well. You could use Krylon's Hunter Green, but it's a little bit more bluish. It's actually a good match for AGM. When I use this, I've learned I'm better off not using primer. I get better results just spraying this directly on. So from roughly around 12 inches away, I will do a minimum of 2 coats with a few minutes in between. Basically the first coat just enough to cover it, somewhere between light and medium, I guess. I'll give it a few minutes to set, and then do a second coat about the same. And then I'll go from there. It may need a third coat, we'll see. Once again, the paint gods seem to have foiled me. For some reason, I guess I'm not supposed to show you guys my painting process. I've just put the first coat on and came back to shut the camera off and realized that it didn't register when I hit the record button. So that's the first coat. I'll show you the second coat. I'll come back in just a few minutes. Basically, I've walked around it twice, spraying it lightly, just enough so that nothing shows through. There are no sags in it at this point, thank goodness. And yeah, so I'll let that set and then come back for a second coat, and I think that'll be good. Let's put on the second coat. think that'll do it. All right, everything's cleaned, repaired, painted, what have you. One thing that did come up, I said at the beginning that this was a March 1944 lantern. And on the bottom, this certainly looked like a 3, but once I had the paint stripped off, I noticed it was actually just a poorly stamped 8. So this is an August 1943. The other thing that came up while I was doing the cleaning, the graphite valve packing went to bits. So I have put new graphite packing in here. I didn't film that part for this video. I did film that, and there will be a separate video on that. And I did it that way because I've had many requests for that video, and I've just been waiting for an opportunity. So it finally came up. So if you wonder why the valve was suddenly put together, that's why. Let's start with the Fount here with the fuel cap. Now I've got a new cap gasket that I have worked onto here. That's the insert. We'll put the insert on and then screw the cap down nice and tight. And the retaining screw. Oh. Okay. And let's deal with the pump. Put the check valve back in first. Just stick it down there and get it lined up and thread it in by hand. That's tight. All right, check valve. Now for the pump. There's our handle, there's our cap, and the spring, and then we've got several parts here that need to go on. And we've got our leather sitting in this, it's called Lexol. It's mostly neat's foot oil, but it's a leather conditioner. So I'll take one of these two nuts and thread it on. This with my taped up pliers just so I can get it tight. If these components aren't tight enough, every once in a while I've had pump leather and some nuts, sometimes washers, fall off down in the bottom. You really don't want that to happen. Just block this. Put that on. Now you remember this little cylinder goes on there, and that sits in the center of the leather. And then we've got this piece that keeps the leather from
collapsing, I guess would be a good way to put it. And then finally a nut that goes on there. Here we've got our air stem. The air stem's easiest to put in place if we just put it in like that. Some people put the air stem in first, but I find that's just makes it more difficult. I will oil the cup. I prefer 3-in-1 oil. Pretty much any oil will do as long as it's not a vegetable oil. Vegetable oil gets gummy as it ages and goes bad. There we go. All right, time to start putting the rest of this back together. So let's get the valve. The stem, and the nut are already in because I replaced the packing. I need to put the pickup on. So we've got our air stem and we've got our spring. Now this spring's probably okay, but I'm going to give it a bit of a stretch to make sure that it's lifting the spring when the valve is open all the way. You see this is, it pokes out through the bottom here when the valve is closed, and that's what restricts the fuel flow so that it doesn't flood when it's cold. That's the open a quarter turn to light deal. Now, proper clocking on this, pump on the right, fuel cap on the left. Actually, it's just like this on the 220B. When we're done, we'll put the decal on. So the valve stem points out. I'm going to use just a little bit of this Permatex blue. This Permatex blue is a thread sealant. It's not a thread locker. It will tighten up the threads just a bit, but it's not like the red stuff, which makes it more or less permanent. You can still get this out later if you need to. One thing that's nice with this is if you're clocking it and you get it clocked properly and it's not quite as tight as you would like it to be, I did that by hand. I'd prefer to tighten it with pliers and have it that tight, but okay, I think that's right where I want it. It'd be great if you could tighten it all the way down with pliers every time. The brass threads are tapered, so once you get it tight with pliers, it will seal. but once you take it out, it never quite gets as tight as it was originally, and that necessitates using some kind of a thread sealant or thread locker on there. So I'm going to take our piece of cardboard to protect my new paint. I wasn't worried about it before, but I certainly am now. So that's on there with the collar. Now we need to put the upper part of the valve, the tip cleaning part, together. So we'll put this is the nut that holds down the burner frame. And that's over here. Now, we'll take note of proper clocking on this. This is the opening for the tip cleaner, and that needs to go in between the valve and the fuel cap. Basically, ideally you can get this upright, or this support lined up with the valve stem. And the eccentric block is still in here. It never did want to come out, so I've just left it in there. And I'm going to use just a bit of thread locker on here too. Or thread sealant rather. Oh, that's a little more than I was hoping for. In this instance, you want to be using it sparingly because you don't want it to run down into the valve. So we'll get everything lined up. At this point now, we can still just rotate it. Let's see how that looks. This hole needs to be underneath. I'm not quite there yet. So if I line this guy up with the valve stem, oops, sorry, I'm moving you there. Got it lined up just right. So now we can pull that out. And still got everything lined up. The bottom part didn't slip. So now we can tighten this nut up. What I'm going to do before I make it tight is get the tip cleaner back in, so I know that the burner frame is in the right place. And Okay, everything looks good there. Go ahead and put our knob on. And this is a painted direction disc, which this is the first I've seen like that, but I seem to recall that was a wartime thing, hearing that somewhere. When I'm on camera, I suddenly become all thumbs. Doesn't help I'm doing this not quite pointed toward me. But because this is painted, I was limited in what I could do to clean that up. All right, we've got the tip cleaner in. I just noticed the eccentric block has retreated, so let's see if we can retrieve that. There we go. Now, as we put the tip cleaner in, we need to, there we go. Now we've got it lined up. You can see the eccentric block going up and down. You need to make sure that the actuator on the lever actually interfaces with the groove on the, put that in the up position for now, so we can put the generator on. So as expected, this guy is never coming apart. It's rusted in place really tightly. I heated and quenched maybe 8 times and it didn't free up at all. But the screens are in good shape. I was able to run a brush all the way up, so there aren't any critters building nests up there or anything like that. So we're in good shape to just put it back in place. And actually you'll see as I turn this, there's a little hole here. That's where that screw needs to go. So I'm going to point this toward me, and hopefully I'll see that screw or that hole show up in this hole. And it should show up about the time it gets tight. Like right about there. My fingers to get it started. Maybe not. Yeah. There we go. It's at an odd angle. They've got it just below the level of the burner frame here. Okay, so now we've got our tip cleaner up so we can put the generator back together. I did manage to clean this up and get things apart. The needle is still intact. The spring and the asbestos braid up there a ways. I did shoot some carburetor cleaner through the tip to make sure that it's clear. And let me take my glasses off so I can see up close. I want to push this in and make sure that the needle comes out the top. And it does, so no obstruction there. That's good. Let's put the nut on there. Notice this nut's black. This thing was very rusty. That seems to be working properly. And, oops, that's it. Where's my 7/16? There it is. All right. Now, our globe on. The pretty side of the vent out. And the last thing we've got to do before we put a mantle on is to apply a new decal. Unfortunately, like I said before, there are no water slide decals available for these that would match the originals, but Old Coleman Parts does sell these vinyl decals, and I'm going to put this down. I'm going to wash my hands before I do that. All right, clean hands. Don't put decals on when your hands are filthy or oily. There we go, all back together. These are not vintage silk lights, but they're also the newer, they're not the current mantles that are of, let's just say, questionable quality. These are a little vintage, just not a lot. Got that. All right, let's bring these in. Through the magic of video editing, our mantles have finished burning in. We've got gas in the fount, and I've pumped in 25 pumps. Now I'm going to crack the valve a quarter turn and see if I hear any spitting or gurgling along with the hiss. Since the fuel system was bone dry, it can take a little bit for gas to reach the generator. So I'm going to listen for that telltale sound. Oh, and there it is. It looks like we may have to use the tip cleaner a bit to get this lit. think that may be the best we'll get out of those mantles. It does seem to be burning reasonably brightly, as it should for a 220. And it's starting to pulse, which is typical of a 220. The generator on this had asbestos braid in it, and I did heat that to red hot with the propane torch and quench it several times to get the carbon out, but there's no doubt still a little bit in there, and some of that may be thrown when it's starting up the first few times, so that was the issue there. Yeah, 220 VX. Brought back to life. Looking almost new, I think. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.